you want a cool little car that's good on gas and pretty cheap and you might be able to get a good deal, you should check out the Scion IA. What is up, guys? It's Will. I think I did literally the exact same movement before. For a few years I tried to save money to get my first car, and for some reason it took so long. You know, I had multiple jobs over multiple summers throughout school years, and for some reason I just could not save money to get a car. And I wasn't really looking to get one that was brand new. I was really just looking for anything that would get me from A to B and that was reliable. I thought you needed thousands of dollars in order to actually get a car, and I think that's why it took me so long to actually get one. It wasn't until recently where I met my coworker. We started about the same time at my job, and at first neither one of us had cars. I remember us talking about how we both wanted to get cars really bad, and she wanted to get a 4Runner, something big and 4-wheel drive, and I was really just looking for anything still at this point. And like I said, I didn't really need anything new. I remember that she was constantly looking on dealerships to see if they were having deals and to see what cars they had. She was always calling them, and she never actually told me that she got a car until a few months later, where casually she just brought up yeah, I just got a car a few months ago. And I was like, what the heck, that's awesome, what car did you get? And she was like, oh, I got a Scion IA. And I'm I think that's the car that my friend just got, because I had just been in New York the week prior and he had just gotten a new car, and I was just in it, and I was like, wow, that car is really cool, it's really nice. So I looked up a picture and I was like, is this the one you got? And she was like, yeah, that is the one. And I was like, oh cool, what color did you get? And she was like, I got a white one. And I was like, oh wow, that's really nice, I like the white. And I was like, if you don't mind me asking, how much do you pay a month for it? And she's like, I only pay $190 a month. And I was like, wow, that's a really good deal. And I was like, how much did you put down? And she was like, I only put down $1,000. And I'm like, what the heck, you put $1,000 down and you pay $190 a month? And I'm like, I would think you need to put down $4,000 in order to maybe pay that. And I was like, did you have a cosigner? Is that why? She was like, no, I didn't have a cosigner at all. And I'm like, do you have good credit? And she's like, no, not really. And I'm like, how did you get this deal? And she's like, I just looked online and they were having a deal, and so I just walked to the dealership and left with a car. That's all I really know. I walked in, brought my pay stub, said this is where I work, this is what I'm doing, here's money, and I left with a car. And I'm like, that's crazy. I was like, I could do that. And after years of trying to save money for a car, I have that money, I can go in right now and get the car. So I asked her if she could call the guy that sold her the car and be hook me up with the same deal. She was like, yeah, sure, absolutely. And she called, and a minute later the guy called me, was like, hey, is this Will? I heard you're looking to buy a new car. And I'm like, oh my god, this is crazy. And I was talking to him over the phone, and he was like, yeah, right now we have a blue one. It was a sapphire blue, and we have a light gray one. And he was asking me which one I was interested in, and I told him I would prefer the lighter gray one. And he was like, okay, cool. He was telling me a little bit more about the car and the process and everything, and about the deal that he gave my friend, and he would be able to give me a similar deal. And while he was talking to me, he was like, oh my gosh, I have bad news. And I'm like, what? And he was like, while we were on the phone, someone just bought the gray one. And I'm like, what the heck? I don't know, I feel like if you were offering something to someone and you were saying this is available and you knew someone's interested, wouldn't you immediately then put something that says oh, this one is on hold or something? I don't know if you can do that with your cars, but wouldn't you do something like that? If not, wouldn't you find out first if somebody else is interested in it? Because then it's two people competing, and that's just not okay, I guess. So I was pretty bummed out at that. And he was like, if you're still interested in the blue one, you can come look at the blue one. And I was like, oh, I don't really know if I want a sapphire blue car for a few years. But I said in the end, I would come and look at it because, I was still interested. He said he had some other deals and he could show me the cars the next morning when I went. So the next morning I go, and he walks me over to the blue Scion, and he's like, this is the car, what do you think? I was like, oh, it's cool. Like I said, though, the color is a little much for me. He was like, oh, we're also having a sale on the Scion MB, which is kind of the Scion XB, that bigger cube looking car, but smaller. Or he was saying that they have the new Scion TC, which I've always liked the Scion TC, but he told me that the TC would be a little bit more expensive than the other two, but I looked at them anyways. At that point, I kind of decided I'd rather pay a little more money and get the TC because I liked it more, and they had a cool pearlized charcoal gray color. And while I was looking at that car, he came back out and was like, oh my gosh, I have good news. And I was like, what? And he was like, our truck just pulled up, and on the freeway there's those trucks and they always have new cars. He was like, one of those just pulled up and they had that same charcoal gray but in the Scion IA. And I'm like, oh, that's crazy, because I wanted that color and the car I wanted, and it was cheaper. And I was like, that's perfect, this is too good to be true that it showed up while I was there. So he was like, yeah, we could take the blue one for a test drive, so you just get a feel for the car, make sure it's okay and still the type of car you want to drive. So I ended up taking the blue one for a test drive. For some reason I get kind of scared driving other people's cars, just in case anything happens to it. That would suck, and especially because I'm trying to buy a car, and if for some reason I were to damage this blue one, I don't want to be stuck with the blue one. So I kind of drove it kind of stiff and nervous around the block and back in. Then went and filled out all the paperwork, signed my check, everything, got the car. Well, didn't get the car. I got paper to say I bought the car because because before they wanted to give it to me, they wanted to inspect it and clean it and make sure everything was okay. So he was asking if I can come pick it up the next day, and I was like, yeah, no problem. And I was just happy that I got my first car and that I got a brand new car, and I just still couldn't believe that I had gotten a car. I go home, I'm all excited. The next day I wake up, I get a phone call. He's like, hey, your car's ready, you can come get it. And I'm like, oh, sick. So my family came with me the next day to come get the car. He taught me how to hook up Bluetooth, showed me a few other things, and then he was like, all right, it's all yours, here's the keys. And I was like, oh my god, this is crazy. I have my first car. He's like, turn it on. It's one of those push to start things. So I'm like, oh, I've never used one of these cars. So he taught me how to do that, and so then I drove home and pulled into my parking lot, and I'm like looking at the car just kind of sitting in it, and I'm like, this is kind of strange. We wrote down in our paperwork that it was at 0 miles, and the mileage on this car was like over 300. So I was like, that's strange, just because I only get like 12,000 miles a year, so 300 miles is kind of like a chunk. And so I called the guy and I'm like, hey, like I just got home and I know in our paperwork we wrote down, the car had 0 miles on it, but it actually has like over 300. Like, is there a way of just like fixing that right now? And he was like, oh, actually it's like a whole process. You have to go re-sign all the paperwork, fill it back out and everything. And I'm like, ugh. And he's like, 300 miles isn't that big of a deal, it won't affect you that much. And I'm kind of like, well, kinda, because if I were to go over, it's like 75 cents a mile, and that could be a large chunk of money by the end that I would have to owe if I were to go over. I don't know what I would be driving. I don't know if all of a sudden I would have to drive somewhere that was a far distance. So I asked him if I could do that, and he was like, yeah, well, can you come in tomorrow? And I was like, no, because I work all week, and it was Sunday, like afternoon by that point, and I needed like several hours to do this. So I was like, I can come in next Saturday. And he was like, yeah, well, if you can do that. So my brother and I decided, hey, we're gonna go drive the car around just for fun, get used to the car, drive around town. And we're driving around, we're out for like 30 minutes. We come back home, I park, and I walk around my car just looking at it because I just gotten it, and I realized that there's no like license plate. And I knew that like a real license plate would come in the mail like a month later, 2 weeks later, because he told me, but there was no temporary license plate, and I'm pretty sure that that's usually like taped to the back of your window. And so I start to look in my trunk, I look at the glove compartment, I look under the seats, and I'm like looking everywhere, and there's literally no temporary license plate. So I call the guy back and I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, I have another problem. There's no temporary license plate. I can't really drive the car and I don't really want to get pulled over. And he was like, oh man, we forgot to give it to you. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, you should be fine driving it though. If a cop pulls you over, just tell them that the dealership forgot to give it to you and you should be fine. But if they do give you a ticket, like once you get your license plate, you can always just be like, oh, this is what happened, and they'll take it away. And I was like, I don't really want to do that because I don't know if that'll stay like on your record and make my insurance raise up. So I was like, no, like I don't want to drive the car until I get a license. And he's like, okay, well, you can come pick it up next Saturday when you come to develop the paperwork. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, and I'm supposed to be driving this car to work through the week. And I was just pretty irritated. I was like, all right, whatever. So literally the car just sat for a week in my driveway, didn't move. So the next weekend comes, I drive back up there, walk in with paperwork in my hand, and a guy at the door is like, hey, like, do you have paperwork that you're handing in? And I was like, yeah, I actually do have some paperwork. I'm turning some in. I'm picking up my temporary license plate because they forgot to give that to me, and I'm re-signing the paperwork because the mileage in the car didn't match what's on the paperwork, and it's like way over, and I want to make sure that it's the same. And the guy seemed pretty shocked about that. He was like, we didn't give you your temporary license plate. And I was like, no. And he's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. I even called and they were like, yeah, he forgot to give it to you. He was like, oh my gosh. And you could like kind of see over his face and like people that are around that like, oh, they effed up, because like that's not like a thing that happens often. And they kind of were like looking around to see if like a manager was listening, because I'm pretty sure that's like not okay to sell a car to someone and not give them a license plate to drive. So the guy goes over and gets two managers. They end up coming over. Managers sit me down and they're like, oh, we're so sorry this happened. And I'm like, I don't really know what to say. I'm kind of like, it's okay, like as long as I get it. And they were like, you know what, like we feel so bad. They were like, since we're redoing your paperwork anyways, we're just gonna say that you got the car today, so you get that whole week free of the car. You don't have to pay it all for that, and your like monthly payment will be pushed back a week, so you have like a whole week. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome, like thank you so much. And they're like, yeah, for sure. And they were like, also, like I'm seeing your payments are like $250 something a month. And I'm like, yeah. They were like, well, did he ever offer this to you? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. And he goes, okay, well, let me go run this real quick. The lady who comes in, she's gonna be here in like 3 minutes, so she'll come in, she'll be able to run it for you. And I'm like, okay. They're like, if you just want to sit, we have some water, coffees, whatever. All of a sudden he comes back like 10 minutes later and he's like, so I ran everything was awesome, it went through, your monthly payments are lower now, that's $215 a month. And I'm like, what the heck, that's awesome, like thank you so much. And also kind of like, why didn't the guy do this in the first place, because that would have lowered my payments by $40, and it's just like, I don't know, it seemed kind of like he purposely didn't do that. Maybe he didn't, maybe he forgot, I don't know, or who knows. And they were like, also, did he offer this to you? And I'm like, what is it? And they're like, oh, it's kind of like a roadside assistance / like car protection type package. And I'm like, no, he didn't offer that to me. And they're like, well, usually you have to pay for it, so maybe that's why he didn't offer it to you. They're like, but we're gonna give it to you for free because we just want to make sure that you're okay and you're not too upset and everything. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And they were like explaining to me, and basically it's like, if I get any scratches or dents or or like cracked windows or like ripped seats or popped tires or anything, like they'll replace that. Like I'll just bring it back and they'll replace it for free. And then it's like at the end of my lease, when I turn it in, I get up to like $5,000 worth of damage that like I don't have to pay. So they give me all this, and it's really cool. And the funny thing is like I went in and I honestly just wanted my paperwork to be correct so that I wouldn't end up having to pay more at the end, and I just wanted to get my temporary license so that I could drive my car around that I just paid for. I ended up going and getting my monthly payments less, and I ended up getting this amazing package. And it's cool because I didn't go asking for anything like this. I really just wanted to be able to drive my car, and I wanted everything to be correct, and they ended up just throwing all this in, and it was really awesome. I took the car home and it's been good ever since. All right guys, that's it for this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit that like button if you guys got a new car recently, and leave a comment down below which car you got. And if you didn't get a new car recently, just comment down below what type of car you have and what your experience was getting that car. Don't forget to subscribe guys, because I post every day and you don't want to miss those. Until next time guys, peace.